Today, we're diving deep into a really powerful perspective on what's described as a major crisis of governance in the Muslim world. Our whole explainer is based on a conversation with Sheikh Abu Najm, and he lays out this classical view on what makes a ruler legitimate and what that means for us today. So let's get into it.
Just imagine that for a second, starting your day, every single day, with that thought. Now, this wasn't a soldier in a war zone or a political dissident. This was the reality for a scholar. And his story, honestly, it sets the entire stage for understanding the principles that, from his point of view, are worth sacrificing everything for.
You see, for years, while he was living in Mexico but working in the US, Sheikh Abu Najm faced detention every single day at immigration checkpoints. The agents were just baffled. They'd ask him, "Why don't just move over here?" They couldn't wrap their heads around it. Because for him, it wasn't about breaking a law. It was about sticking to a very specific, deeply held principle rooted in his understanding of Islamic law.
So, what is this principle? What's so important that it would justify that kind of daily struggle? Well, it all goes back to a foundational prophecy, one that really frames this entire discussion about what Islamic political legitimacy even looks like.
Okay, this right here, this is the absolute heart of the entire argument. According to a prophecy from the Prophet, peace be upon him, the era of true, rightly guided Islamic rule, the Khilafah, was always destined to be brief. And from this viewpoint, everything that came after it is something else entirely.
So what this prophecy does is it creates this really sharp black and white distinction. On one side, you have the Khilafah, which this viewpoint holds is the only divinely legislated form of rule. And on the other side, well, you have everything else: kingship, republics, modern nation-states, the whole shebang. According to this argument, trying to slap an Islamic label on these other forms isn't just an evolution, it's a fundamental corruption of a core principle.
All right, so if that's the case, how is a legitimate ruler supposed to be established according to classical Islamic law, or Sharia? This perspective argues there are very specific, non-negotiable conditions that have to be met.
So according to classical jurisprudence, these are the only three ways. That's it. As the Sheikh puts it, there's no fourth way, there's no fifth way. It's a closed list. And when you look at the dozens of Muslim nation-states we have today, with their constitutions, their parliaments, their elections, they just don't fit into any of these boxes.
But this is a super important question. That third path, the ruler who seizes power by force, the mutaghalif, that's the one people often point to in order to justify modern regimes. But according to the classical view, it's not a blank check for any strongman to just take over. Oh no, it comes with some very, very strict conditions.
For a ruler who took power by force to even be considered legitimate in this framework, he has to check three massive boxes: complete and total implementation of Sharia, unifying the Muslims under one single leader, and personally meeting all the qualifications of a Khalifa. The argument then follows that by this standard, not a single modern ruler even comes close to qualifying.
Now, I know what you might be thinking. What about the Ottomans? A lot of people look back at them as the last great Khalifa. But from this strict classical perspective, even they didn't quite make the cut. Their system of governance was a hybrid, a mix of Islamic laws with their own Turkish and nomadic traditions right from the very beginning.
And this is a perfect example of that departure. The Ottoman millet system organized non-Muslims by their own religious communities. This gets contrasted with the classical concept of al-Dimma. The Sheikh argues that the millet system was a hybrid model, and that the reason it's so praised today is because it aligns with the modern desire to move away from those classical rules.
So if the classical model is presented as being this clear-cut, how on earth did we get to the situation we're in today? Well, the argument points to a kind of intellectual shift, where the very tools of Islamic jurisprudence were allegedly hijacked to justify a reality that was seen as illegitimate.
Here's the core of the problem as it's presented. Legal tools that were meant for deriving new rulings on new issues were instead used to change foundational principles. It's about the misuse of ijtihad, that's the process of scholarly legal reasoning, to basically give the modern nation-state a fake Islamic seal of approval.
So you have these valid legal principles, things like maslaha, which means public interest. These are legitimate tools in Islamic jurisprudence, or fiqh. But the argument is that they were picked up by people who weren't qualified and applied to these huge foundational issues, basically arguing that public interest meant we just had to accept these new forms of government.
And here's the crucial point. Using these sophisticated legal tools isn't a free-for-all. It has a massive, massive prerequisite. You have to have reached the scholarly rank of a mujtahid. That's a truly independent jurist, a level of deep scholarship that is almost unheard of in our time. I mean, just look at the qualifications for a mujtahid laid out by classical jurists. It is an immense mountain to climb. We're talking about total mastery of the Quran, Hadith, the entire legal tradition, and all of the linguistic sciences. The whole point of this incredibly high bar, the argument goes, is precisely to prevent people from misusing these powerful tools on the fundamentals of the religion.
This perspective leans heavily on historical examples. It points to giants like Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Malik, scholars who literally chose to be punished rather than give their stamp of approval to rulers they saw as unjust. And that legacy is held up in stark contrast to what the source calls modern palace scholars, who are accused of providing religious cover for the current regimes.
Okay, so after all of that critique, where do you go from there? What is the path forward? Well, the solution that's proposed isn't a call for some immediate, chaotic revolution. It's much more of a patient, long-term, multi-generational project.
The strategy basically has three parts. First, education. Muslims have to relearn the correct understanding of governance from the ground up, so they can't be tricked anymore. Second, physical preparation, which is about reviving a spirit of self-reliance and the ability to defend oneself. And third, withdrawal, a systematic refusal to serve or legitimize these systems by resigning from key positions.
And this three-pronged approach is specifically designed to counteract the three pillars of control that these modern regimes allegedly use: their monopoly on violence, their use of court scholars for religious justification, and keeping the general population passive and docile.
Now, let's be really clear. This is presented as a long-term vision. The Sheikh suggests a full revival might not even be possible in our lifetime. The goal, instead, is to first understand why it's not possible, and then to plant the right seeds of knowledge and capability for the generations to come.
And this brings us right back to where we started. The model being proposed is one of principled resistance. It's about choosing hardship over compromise, clarity over convenience. It connects perfectly back to that opening story of a scholar choosing to face attention every single morning rather than bend on his principles.
And that really leaves us with a final thought, a pretty tough question for our own time. This classical perspective, which sees almost all of modern governance as a fundamental compromise, forces us to ask, in an age that's all about compromise, what is the true price of holding to your principles, and who is willing to pay it?